Welcome to the Sisters Uncensored podcast, where we get into everything from childhood trauma to millennial adulting and all things in between.
We share crazy stories from the past and present to help us cope with the insanity that is our lives.
By sharing our perspectives, we hope to bring some relatability, laughter, and unsolicited advice that can help you survive the messiness of life along with us.
My name's Jessica Labita. I'm a millennial mom, wife, and marketing professional, and I am absolutely insane.
My name is Ashley Leneve. I am a millennial stay-at-home mom, avid golfer, and too mouthy for my own good.
We are real sisters, and this is Sisters Uncensored. Take this trip with us. All right, welcome to Sisters Uncensored. Today we have with us Vanessa Reiser. She is an amazing author, therapist, Ironman, runs wedding dresses all around this country. She does amazing things for people who have been susceptible to narcissistic and cult abuse. And so we're super excited to talk to her today. We read her book, and it was very good, very insightful. And so, yeah, we're just happy to have you here and talk.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's fun. So tell our audience like a little about yourself, your background, kind of what inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So I started working in the Bronx at an outpatient mental health clinic, sort of triage style out of USC. And then I found myself in a relationship that was confusing and difficult. And I kind of lost myself. Okay. And then
happens to us all.
Yeah, been there. Yep. And then I started to realize that I wanted to make some noise, bring awareness to narcissistic abuse. So I ran across the state of New York in a wedding dress, 285 miles in 11 days.
Oh my God.
To raise awareness for narcissistic abuse. And that got me the book deal. And sort of, I've been, kind of advocating for victims ever since, and sort of trying to make a lot of noise about it. It's very insidious. It's not sort of the acute trauma of a direct hit physically, but I think in most cases, my clients would agree it is far worse.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think one of the things that became very evident to me, it's literally like a method of torture. And so when you're reading about the cycle and the different traits that everybody has that has this, I would so much rather be punched in the face than have to go through something like that.
Literally.
Yeah. Because then at least it's over. You know what I mean? This is ongoing.
Yeah.
Cyclical.
I used to say that a lot, actually. I'd rather just get the shit kicked out of me. Just beat me up. I'd rather do that. So it's done. It's just done. And then you're on to the next thing.
And they do things that are just flirting with that. So they'll pinch you, pull your hair, little sort of quasi microdosing you onto physical abuse in little insidious ways. So it's not quite the acute trauma of a direct black eye, let's say, but there's these little things that they do just to sort of see what you'll tolerate. So it's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts versus you say the direct hit where you're like, you know what, I'm out of here. So it's far more difficult to detect, and that's what makes it so dangerous. In fact, the more benign version of this is actually, in my opinion, way worse, because you may spend 30 years with someone like that. So I often think when my clients are dealing with somebody who's particularly benign that I wish that they would do something. Unfortunately, I hate to say that, so they could kind of get out of this cycle. But it's pretty brutal. It's like having a personal terrorist.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a really good way to put it. What percentage of patients that you work with, or people in general that have experienced this type of relationship, get out right away?
There is just sort of a select few.
Yeah.
I think it takes statistically 7 times for people to get out of abusive relationships. Yeah. So they kind of go through that cycle where there's the love bombing, the devalue, and then the discard. And then on repeat, it's the makeup session, the tension building, the fallout, the makeup session, the tension. And they kind of go in this loop until it develops into a trauma bond. And then you're sort of addicted to the highs of the makeup session. And so it's really hard to get out. It would be like trying to, kick a major drug habit.
Yeah.
You get this dopamine kick from it being okay. And so it keeps people sort of in this loop, and they kind of have to like, you know, hold their nose and jump in the water or rip the Band-Aid off and just like run for the hills to get out of it.
Yeah. I could say, I mean, in my own experience anyway, like once I was out of it and I started dating, you could find like a nice guy and I was almost like, be mean to me. Like, I need you to be mean to me. You're too nice. It's weird. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. I think people really have to get their nervous system regulated.
Yeah.
And it takes a little bit of time to get to baseline where it's like not the ups and downs. You know, life sort of gives us these ups and downs in general that are sort of subtle, but being in these relationships is so traumatizing to your brain and your nervous system because it's literally up and down, like radical. And there's tons of studies around why like getting to baseline is healthy for people. Even when we're feeling really, really good, we're nervous about it falling again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big part of like, so Vanessa's book is essentially like a handbook for dealing with this type of a relationship. And as someone who is not in this kind of a relationship, I think for me it was particularly helpful because I know people who are in these kinds of relationships. And so obviously being on the outside of it and reading in, it almost gives you like a broader view of sort of what they're dealing with, what they're thinking, what's happening in their mind, and makes you more sympathetic to them as a victim. I think a lot of this stuff that you talk about, like where the people who are close to you and how they, you know, go through this whole process of like destroying you or trying to destroy you, and then people not knowing like what to believe from them versus what to believe based on what you're saying. I can say I've never said to anyone like, why wouldn't you just leave, right? But like at the same time, I get why people would say that. And reading this really helped me to be more mindful of the words I use, the things I say, and to be more compassionate, because sometimes you can't help but think like, why would she or he put up with this for so long, right? But I found this really helpful from that perspective because I'm not in that kind of a relationship. And so to our audience, if you haven't read this or you're not in this kind of a relationship, I probably would guarantee you that you know someone who is or could be. And so it's really, what I loved about it was how clinical it is and methodical to like sort of walk you through everything that's happening and gives advice to kind of manage every step of the way.
Like each phase.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So how this ties into what you guys were just talking about with the sort of highs and the lows and needing that pullback. I think you're still in part of like this cycle where you're like the post-relationship abuse. It seems like can go on forever.
Well, first of all, thank you for speaking out as somebody who hasn't endured it, because I think that is like the chef's kiss, because for people who have gone through it, trying to describe it to somebody and then having them actually advocate for them is incredible. So I think by and large, people need to do a better job of being empathetic and putting themselves in the shoes of others. Like, I've never been in a wheelchair, but I understand like this is something that I would become the student in, and I would yield to that person who would be describing that experience to me. And so, you know, big kudos to those who are listening, who are advocating, even in spite of the fact that they haven't endured it themselves. That is like the magic of this, in my opinion. So that's the first thing I want to say.
Thanks.
Yeah, because I think that's really important. So many people are just like, well, it never happened to me, or he didn't do that to me, or, you know, and they just, you know, their egos are too involved. And so that's really an amazing thing.
It's kind of funny because like when she was reading it, she would call me with like things that she learned about it. And I'm like, you're not telling me anything I don't know. Tell me more. What else did you learn today? And then it was like just her from the outside looking in, being just realizing how different it is in the person's head while you're going through it. It made me kind of laugh a little bit. The amount that, like, I don't know, the amount of times you called me and you were just like, so this is this.
I pride myself on being like a pretty intelligent and clinical person, right? So I mean, I've spent my entire career in the pharmaceutical industry. Like, this stuff makes sense to me. And so I think it being written from such a clinical perspective just gave me a new perspective on what is such a personal issue to me. And so it spoke my language, I guess, which really resonated with me. And that's where I would like message her and be like, holy shit, like, da 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 da. Like, and she's like, I know. And I mean, she's done a ton of research herself over the course of time, but this is the first time I've actually read about something like this. And I think too, you know, the way we connected was because Ashley and I had done an episode about our own personal abuse stories. And I was in a physically abusive relationship in my early 20s. He probably was that, but I managed to get out of it, I think, soon enough to where it didn't get to be as bad as it probably could have. And it makes me think like how crazy it is that you could live your life with someone like this for such an extended period of time. I don't know. It's mind-boggling to me.
I feel like the longer you're in it, like by the time you get out, you're like, you have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
You have no idea who you are.
It made so many more things make sense for me.
Yeah, and I think you brought up another really good point, which is that people don't leave, and we ask them things like, why did you stay? Mm-hmm. And so the book I really think is important. For me, I wanted to destigmatize the idea of, you know, your involvement or your responsibility. It's not your fault that you met someone like that. And the same thing with being in a cult. We have this idea that, you know, if you're in a cult, it happens in some faraway land. It's not real. It could never happen to me. And then we see like the NXIVM cult, which happened in New York very recently, where Keith Raniere was branding women with his initials, and now he'll spend the rest of his life in jail, God willing. And we saw the Stolen Youth cult, which was the Sarah Lawrence College, similarly situated in New York, also with it happened very recently. So it's happening next door to you, whether it's in a cult of one, which is an intimate partner relationship, a cult of five in a cultic family system, a cult of millions in some political environments. But you will see there is a groupthink scenario all around you all the time. So the book is really designed to destigmatize. It can happen to anyone. They don't really have a type. They will cast out a million lines. Whomever doesn't have the boundaries and doesn't understand what it is part of their harem. And so that's really what my whole goal was to destigmatize this idea that like, I don't victim blame in any regard.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So I would have never, had we not met and talked and I read your book, put two and two together with the connection of the cults and narcissistic abuse.
Me
and
neither.
I think that's a huge part, like not to be redundant, because we have covered narcissistic abuse, I think, in the past briefly, and we've talked to some other coaches. Obviously, it's a very personal subject to us, but at the same time, the cult thing is like crazy to me. Like I never put two and two together. And so since I finished reading the book, I started watching The Vow on HBO, and I watched the whole thing. I finished it last night. First of all, I just like, it's crazy. Mm-hmm. How it evolved from what seemed like a business model, a corporate culture, a leadership training, which I'm in corporate America deep, and I'm thinking about some of the changes and the things that are going on, and I'm like,
the language.
Part of me is getting a little freaked out. I'm like,
am I on a cult?
Yes, literally. I'm like,
a cult.
we see that word. We use those words. And then I'm like, oh my God. Like
she's getting triggered.
I was like,
it's like real time.
I need Vanessa immediately. I need to know if I'm heading down a cult. No, but I'm like, if they start fucking branding me and try to make me sleep with somebody, we're gonna have a problem.
Red flag.
No, seriously. So I think it's a fine line, right? Like, and how that shit evolved to the way that it did. And then it like made me wonder, was he thinking the whole time? Like he planned this shit. And then when you found out the shit that was going on behind like what it looked like, I was like, holy crap. Like he's locking women in rooms, children, 15-year-old girls,
Ew.
Raping them, forcing them to do horrible things to other women and like their children. They don't even know. And he like, yeah, the whole time he like made them into these people, and now they're abusing other people. Like it turned into like what is very familiar for me, I guess, to what it became. And I'm like, wait a minute. I need to be very observant of what's going on around me now at all times. I'm freaked out. It freaks
And
me
I think
out.
a key component to that story is that Keith Raniere was very unassuming. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like anybody.
Before.
He's
Yeah,
like a
you don't
total dork.
expect someone who does something like that. You have perception of what a bad person would look like, right? You know what I mean? You can picture something in your head, and it's never like the nerdy
Scientist.
yes, got boy
Hippie.
next door, things like that. Like you just don't.
Yeah.
It doesn't equate in your, not in my brain anyway.
No.
Now, I mean, I look at everybody crooked. I don't care.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, Ted Bundy was the same way. He was sort of unassuming, wouldn't really come off as somebody who would just, going to break your jaw and, murder and pillage and all of the rest. So I think that's a big part of it too, is that we need to do better at believing victims based on, what they're telling us versus how this person may be perceived. A lot of them are extremely philanthropic. I think 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly, so they can climb the ladder and they can be very gregarious and charming. And so, there's a lot of red flags that we need to sort of understand before we just assume that, no, this person is a pillar of the community. I mean, poets, priests, and politicians are known for kissing babies and stabbing you in the back. So this idea that they're going to be, face forward and look a certain way. I mean, if somebody's so buttoned up, that's actually a big red flag. Those people in your yard who have the perfect manicured grass, and you think, oh, this, Tim looks like this is such a nice fan. You just don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. It makes sense. Actually, it's almost like a, look over here, not over here kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. I, when I was reading parts of this, I was thinking to myself, the whole Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni thing, Ryan Reynolds and all of that, and every day, there's some new information that's coming out about that case. And one of the theories that I saw is basically that Ryan Reynolds is like the massive narcissist in that relationship. And maybe that she's just doing what she's supposed to do because she's a victim of his narcissism. But I don't know. I think he is a narc, without a doubt. I just think that she's also probably a bitch. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there were 2 things that stood out was, and obviously I can't diagnose anybody who I have not treated, but Justin's engagement video was over the top love bombing, in my opinion. It was too long and
Ryan
about
or
himself, Justin, and it was very much about himself. I think the engagement video was something like 23 minutes long, and he changes outfits. It's a whole production. And then
I didn't see his engagement video.
Oh.
And then his apology rant was again very much a rant and sort of prolonged. So he definitely likes the sound of his own voice and et cetera. So there were a couple of things that I did pick up on in the Justin universe, but again, I can't diagnose anybody who I've not met.
Yeah, of course. I just chalked it up to he's like artsy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just feel like anybody who's deep into any kind of acting, entertainment in that kind of way, that they're typically very artsy on the inside and creative.
Well, I think Hollywood also has a ton of narcissism because what they can do is they can put on the show and then, cut and go right to
and when
else.
these cults are recruiting people to build their cult, that's who they're recruiting.
The professional liars.
It's like actors, directors, high-profile politicians. Like, that's who they're looking to bring in, which I found fascinating, especially connected to all the shit that's going on in Hollywood right now with a lot of this stuff. It's like the Blake, Justin, Ryan stuff. I don't know. I personally think Ryan is a big problem.
I think so too.
I haven't heard the Justin theory, but I can see what you're saying. Like,
yeah, you should check out his engagement video. It's pretty interesting. I think
definitely need to look
when
at
you.
that.
It's like one of those if you know kind of things. When you watch it, you're like, oh, okay, that's cringe as hell.
I can see that.
His voice message to Blake in the middle of the night, like 2:00 in the morning, that was cringe as hell.
So you have to there's bigger picture circumstance, I think, to that story where it was she had just texted him at whatever it was, 1:47. And then rather than him texting her back, he voice memoed her. So that's why he still had it. It wasn't like he called her and left a voicemail. It was a voice memo text.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And then he sent that like 10 minutes after they had gone
back and forth.
Yeah.
Not like he's just messaging her in the middle of the night.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. Context is important.
Totally.
Let's be honest. That's crazy.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, like if they're going to settle out of court or if they're
Well,
gonna...
the other thing too is that the judicial system doesn't do what it's designed to do anyway. So really, whatever the outcome there is for me will mean very little.
Yeah.
Like O.J. Simpson walked free. So are we really putting a lot of stock? And certainly my clients are dealing with custody issues where they lose their children. So, whatever the outcome, let's say, is in the judicial system, for me, I'm like, that means nothing.
Right.
Literally nothing.
No, I could see that. It is. It's very flawed.
Yeah.
Very flawed.
I don't think it'll go that far.
No, it's like if you have money, you can, you'll win.
Yeah.
In most cases, I think.
At the very least, you can drag it out forever.
Yep.
So how do you think all this stuff ties into like the whole Diddy situation?
That is,
Seems very culty.
yeah, that's a very, very, very big problem. And I think we're just peeling back the layers right now because this is sort of far reaching and I think it hits a bunch of different realms, including like whomever the security was and whomever, the agents were, and everybody was sort of hushed because they were afraid of him. And so you're going to see a lot of things, I think, come out there. I think Cassie sort of started the ball rolling, thank God, because she really was brave, because I think there are probably potentially murders that were involved in that and drugging. And
Definitely.
Yeah, a lot of stuff is going to come out. And a lot of my clients come to me and tell me that they were drugged by their abuser. I had a client come to me and tell me that her son was drugging her. And I knew it was true because the narcissist will, sort of like Manson, have other people do the dirty work. So their minions are very much at work while they're sort of hiding, and doing
but they're
nothing.
pulling the strings.
Yeah. And so when she said that to me, I remember saying, you can never tell anybody else that story. I believe you, it happened, but you can never, they'll put you in a rubber room if you say, my son's poisoning me. It's like, it doesn't work. But it happens, these kinds of things. So poisoning is a big thing.
Oh my God.
I watched the Fall of Diddy on HBO Max. Did you watch that? It's like a 5-part docuseries. It's dark.
I haven't watched it yet.
The stuff that he did, like the victims came forward and they're telling their stories. And it's like everything, first of all, there's a pattern, there's clear patterns. But basically, Cassie's the one who actually had the balls to stand up to him. And I feel like some of the people that they interview an assistant, like a guy who just his job is just to go set up the freaking room for the party, all right? You could get called in halfway through to bring in some more Viagra and lube and whatever. Like, whatever. It didn't matter. But this guy, he's like, I was used to it. It was completely normal to me. But I knew it wasn't normal. You know what I mean? He's like, there was just something about being around this man that you couldn't say no. Like, people just did not say no. He was asked to do a couple of different things and he was just like, I can't believe. He's like, I'm a Christian, good man. And I could not believe that I couldn't bring myself to say, no, I'm not doing it. It's messed up.
Yeah, it's really scary. I think that one is particularly upsetting.
Yeah.
I think that's going to include young people and all kinds of horrors. I mean, I think we're just scratching the surface when that all plays out. And it's very far reaching. I think a lot of famous people are heavily involved with that and we're also afraid of him. And that's what they do. They're intimidating. So they might make a phone call to somebody and they're not even really on the phone with anyone. They're just screaming at them so that you get nervous.
Yeah.
They do stuff like this. A lot of tactics involved.
It's true. That's very true.
It's wild. The hardest part of watching The Vow, I think, was the end when they were saying how the minions essentially were going to be sentenced. And from like Jump Street, I thought that chick Nancy was like a shitbag. And then once I got through the end of the second season and you realize she's been on house arrest and all these things and how she got so sucked into what had happened, I was like praying that she wasn't going to get a huge sentence because I mean, they definitely found her guilty of racketeering. So I was like, oh my God, like, and you're seeing all the other people get like shorter and shorter probation, nothing. And I'm like, oh God.
She was like the supreme minion. She didn't sort of figure it out until like the 11th hour.
Oh my God.
And then she fell apart.
And when she
yeah.
did, it was heartbreaking to like even watch the documentary, like how emotional she was. Ugh.
Do you know what has to happen? This is what it is like for you to get out of a cult, what you have to, by the time you've gone through this process, what you have to do is literally unhand your entire self, if that makes sense, because you've put so much energy into becoming this person.
Yeah.
So you're so invested, you have put so much energy, and your mind is totally around this creature as being your deity, etc., that for you to do that, it's almost like disemboweling. It's like this, it's almost like you're like a free fall.
Yeah.
You have to become something else. And so for her to do that and for others to do that is very, very challenging.
Well, and there's some of them who, with that particular case, are still have not come out of it.
That's what I was going to ask. Has everybody snapped out of it?
No, not everybody.
So there's like a Nexium 5, they call them, and they're like still trying to fight the good fight and get this guy out of jail. And journalists won't talk to them. Basically, the documentary shows like the journalist asking if they'll do like a story on them and tell their side of the story. And the journalist was like, no, I'll talk about how you're going to recover from the brain damage that you have from this motherfucker. But I'm not telling your side of the story because you don't know your side of the story. You're still so in this.
Yeah.
And they're like, but we'll follow you out if that's what you want to do. And they were like, no.
Wow.
Yeah. I think, whoever is listening or watching, watch The Vow. It is a really, really good way for you to understand coercive control, without a doubt. It's like the chef's kiss. If you want to study how somebody can be a master manipulator, that's like you'll get your PhD in it right after that.
That's fun.
What do you think about it's like tying into Hollywood and cults and all the things, Scientology?
Scientology is another great example of isolation. So like Tom Cruise is famously disallowed from looking at the media. So he has blinders on and his only information is given to him by the source, right? So whoever your abuser is, if it's in a cult of one or a cult of many, similarly, you are disallowed from information. I am going to be the source of information as, your grand leader in this abusive relationship, and you're going to just do and listen to what I say. I know everything. And you can see it happens over time. I don't know if this was your situation, but they isolate you from your friends. And so you're not, they kind of will say negative things about your friend. Oh, I guess your brother didn't really call you last week. That sucks. Like, I'm so sorry. He always does that to you. Why does he do that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So like over time, you're like, fuck my brother. What an asshole. Like that's such bullshit. You know what I mean? So over time, you find yourself alone and isolated from these people. And similarly with Scientology, they are disallowed from getting any information outside of that organization. It's like one of the glaring red flags about Scientology is they are disallowed. But they have to wear the same clothes, they're manipulated, etc.
I feel like there's so much insight into what's going on there. Like we have a pretty good idea that this is a cult, but I guess they're protected because they're a religion. Is that why no one's doing anything?
Does it count as a religion?
They managed to get some kind of a tax loophole that did sort of put them in that realm.
Really?
I forget. Yeah. If you watch some of the stories on it, they had some major court victory where they actually are considered a religious organization.
Go figure. Leah Remini.
Yeah.
She was in it.
Yeah.
When she got out, she did a docuseries about how fucked up it is.
She's like a huge activist to try to bring awareness to what's going on there. And this is her life's passion now is working to.
She's also the poster child for post-separation abuse because they never left her alone to this day.
No.
She just gets tortured.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's wild. I just can't understand, to me, especially after watching The Vow and everything that went on there. And for all I know, there could be huge federal investigations still going on into Scientology, but it's just so obvious after, if you did this with Nexium, why can't you do it with them? And to your point, maybe it is a financial loophole of what they are, because I think they are technically an established religion, but
it's the same thing.
It shouldn't matter.
Could be a lot of things.
Clients come to me from Jehovah's Witness too. I get a lot of people who extricate themselves from that. Mm-hmm. It's considered a religious organization.
Yep.
But people come to me hysterical crying. They have to leave their families behind because they are leaving Jehovah's Witness. There's all kinds of different cults, and they're also starting all the time. So people will call me and say like, I was in this cult, have you ever heard of it? And I'm like, well, not every cult, because there's these little MLMs that are always sort of like flowering and branching out all the time, new ones. We saw the Twin Flame one was another one where, they're kind of like peddling this story, and then they sort of try to coerce people into having same-sex relationships, and that was the thing that was happening. So there are certain organizations that will actually convince you to change your sexual identity. That's a theme. There's all kinds of different ways that people feel excited about getting control over others. It's a wild whole underworld of that.
Yikes! It sounds like it's like fetish
it is
specific, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. You know what I mean?
It is. That was one of the things that was like very insightful in the vow, and a connection also in your book was how it like to do things in a way that like can be considered like violating someone else's space or whatever, like brings them a thrill.
Ugh.
Like it came out in the vow that Keith, like Nancy would go on vacation and Keith would bring girls over and fuck them all over her house. And she had no idea that was going on.
And he did it just because.
And he did it just
he got
because
off
it was
on
like,
it.
yeah.
And one of
he
them was
knew.
her daughter.
Yes.
What?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's sick.
Ugh. Ew.
Very sick.
Yeah.
Nasty.
But the whole connection to the cult thing and the narcissistic thing, it makes so much sense. And so that's what I loved the most about your book, was how it tied all that together, because I feel like people use the term narcissist today in society as like an insult and not truly understanding what the meaning behind the word really is. And when you put it into a perspective where it's like a narcissist and a cult, and you can connect those two so similarly, I think it helps to bring to light like how serious what that is.
You're like me.
is.
I have a very scientific brain because
Yeah.
I went to USC and I studied social policy, community organizing, and I'm very curious about social systems.
Yeah.
Like I'm very interested in human behavior and stuff like that. So that's when it clicked for me. Somebody introduced me to Mark from the Vow.
Okay.
And they were like, you have to meet Mark, you have to meet Mark. And like, as we started to talk about all of the characteristics, I was like, this is the same thing. It's about mind control. It's about positive and negative reinforcers. For instance, if you're in an abusive relationship and the love bombing disappears, just the removal of the love bombing is sort of very Pavlovian in terms of Pavlov's dog. This reinforcer disappears, and then you go, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? And then you get really sort of upset about like what you've done. And so it's not even just they need to call you names in the devaluing, it's just the removal of the love bombing. That reinforcer or that negative reinforcer can set you into a complete tizzy.
Yeah.
And that's important for people to understand. It's really about mind control.
Yeah.
It's about you kind of second guessing yourself and doing almost anything to get that dopamine kick again, to make it okay again. So it's very Pavlovian, it's somewhat Freudian, but I like the idea of it being very scientific in terms of the brain and how we work. And I love the idea of this because it destigmatizes. It can happen to anyone. This idea that like, you fell for it because you were naive or you were uneducated is complete horseshit. And that was evidenced by the Stolen Youth cult with Felicia Rosario, who was a psychiatrist directly, and she fell into that cult as well. So it really, we're kind of all vulnerable if we don't understand
You're more
mind
vulnerable,
control.
right? Like, what's your thing that you always say about how they choose their victims?
Well, from what I've read, it's like they pick out people that have qualities that they don't have and they admire and almost want to strip them away from you. I don't know.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what the main supply might look like. I guess what I understand too, though, is they have this sort of gaggle of supplemental supplies that
It's
maybe
all
aren't
around.
really,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
fitting the bill. That kind of just like, okay. And by the way, those supplies are not necessarily intimate partners. They can be the children of, right? They can be the coworkers. They can be mom. They can be neighbors. They just have to have constant attention. So they're always kind of, like I said, the main supply, and then whomever else is going to babysit their feelings for the rest of the time.
Yeah, they're never alone.
No.
Never alone. Can't handle it.
No.
Meanwhile, I'm like, leave me the fuck alone. Nobody talk to me. Just kidding.
Right. Seriously. Oh my gosh. And now I'm afraid to like be part of any group activities. So I'm like, is this a cult? Is this a cult?
No, it's your daughter's soccer practice.
I
It's
know.
fine.
Exactly. It's so true. Oh my gosh.
That's hilarious.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in and talking to us today. I think this was super insightful for me. I'm so glad that we met you and that I got to read about all this
Likewise.
stuff. Like
Thank
I
you
said,
so
'cause
much.
It really is like a big deal. We're super passionate about this. So as you're like partaking in different charitable events and things, let us know where we can get more involved because we definitely want to do this. And then I would say to our audience, please take time to check out Vanessa's book, Narcissistic Abuse. You can read it on, or you can buy it on Amazon. You can read it on Amazon because you can get it on your Kindle. Anything else you want to say?
I think
As
I
far
should
as, like-
probably take your number. Just kidding.
Ashley and Vanessa are going to start sessions together very soon.
There we go.
And follow Vanessa on her social media. So she's Vanessa Reiser, LCSW on Instagram, TikTok, and all the things. Do you have anything else that you want to?
This year, we're going to run across Rhode Island. I think it's May 30th. So not quite Narcissistic Abuse Awareness Day, but on or about. I think it's the Friday prior. And we're going to circle one of the family courts there to sort of make some noise, and hopefully some press will come out and some victims will share their stories. It's a short run. It's only 27 miles, so it'll be one day. Thankfully.
Lazy, just lazy.
Only 27. That's more than a marathon.
Get it together. I valet at the mall. Okay? I'm not the one. Trust me.
We'll work on
God.
our running game. Ashley bought me a jump rope and I haven't even used it yet, so
I've been using it.
we're getting there.
Maybe next year we'll jump rope across the state.
Maybe.
I love it.
Oh no, I hate cardio.
Oh my
it
God.
sucks.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you
really
so much.
appreciate
Thanks,
you
guys.
coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming
And,
on.
yeah, keep in touch with us so that we can keep helping because we really believe in this and it's a good thing you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.